There is a 45-second scene in Season 8 of The Simpsons where a man named Frank Grimes watches Homer Simpson sleep at his own co-worker's funeral, and the crowd laughs. And something about that image has never fully left me. Not because it is dark, though it is, but because a German philosopher predicted it would happen, predicted the exact shape of it in 1883, more than 100 years before Homer Simpson existed. Friedrich Nietzsche described a kind of person he called the last man, comfortable, content, impossible to finish, loved by everyone around him, outlasting everyone who objects to him. He meant it as a warning. The Simpsons gave that warning a name, a yellow face, and 35 years of primetime television. Today I want to go through exactly how that happened, section by section, episode by episode, scene by scene. Welcome to Yellow Fan. Let's get into it. The last man has a name, and it's Homer J. Simpson. There is a scene in the very first episode of The Simpsons, aired December 17th, 1989, where Homer Simpson sits on his couch, stares at the television, and eats. He is not thinking about tomorrow. He is not planning anything. He is not even really watching. He is just existing in the presence of something that requires nothing from him. The show gives this moment no special weight. No music swells. No character comments on it. It just happens, the way it always happens. The way it will keep happening for the next 35 years and counting. Because this is simply what Homer does. He sits, he eats, he watches. He is content. That image, a man on a couch, reaching for something he does not need, satisfied with a life that asks nothing of him, is one of the most recognizable images in the history of television. And it is also, almost exactly, the image a 19th century German philosopher described as the end of human civilization. Friedrich Nietzsche was born in 1844 and died in 1900, which means he never saw a television, never tasted a Duff beer, and definitely never heard anyone say, "Dough!" But in 1883, in a book called Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he described a kind of person he called the last man. Not a monster, not a villain, something he considered far more troubling than either of those things. A person who has made comfort the entire point of being alive, who has decided that safety and ease and the removal of all difficulty is what a good life looks like, and who is so thoroughly happy with this arrangement that the idea of wanting something more has simply stopped occurring to him. Nietzsche wrote about the last man as a warning. He had this character, Zarathustra, go down from a mountain to speak to a crowd of people, and Zarathustra tries to describe a better way to live. The crowd ignores him. So he tries a different approach. He tells them about the last man, this small, blinking, endlessly comfortable person who has given up on greatness and replaced it with warmth and routine and the daily management of small pleasures. Nietzsche expected the crowd to be disgusted by this picture. He was wrong. The crowd cheers. They shout, "Make us into this last man. You can keep the rest." The last man, in Nietzsche's description, is tired. Not tired in the way someone is tired after working hard or building something. Tired in a deeper way. Tired of effort itself. Tired of the kind of life that asks you to reach for things. He takes no risks. He seeks only what feels good and what keeps him safe. He has no great passion. He has no real goal beyond making it to the next comfortable moment. And Nietzsche's most cutting observation about him is this: the last man believes he has discovered happiness. He says so. He blinks when he says it. That blink is everything. It is the tell. Because the last man is not lying exactly. He really does feel okay. He really is comfortable. But the blink gives him away. There is something underneath the contentment that knows it is all a little thin, a little too small, a little too easy. He just never looks at it directly. Now picture Homer Simpson on that couch. Homer J. Simpson is, by any honest accounting, a man who has arranged his life around the avoidance of effort. He works at the Springfield nuclear power plant as a safety inspector, a job that matters enormously in the real world and that he treats as an obstacle between himself and the couch. In the opening credits of the show, the sequence that plays at the start of every episode, the one that has burned itself into the memory of an entire generation, Homer is leaving work. The whistle blows. He grabs a glowing piece of radioactive material, looks around, and casually stuffs it into the back of his shirt, rather than disposing of it properly, because properly disposing of it would take an extra 30 seconds. He has somewhere to be. He has a couch to get to. This is not played as shocking. It is played as routine. It is played as the thing Homer does every day, automatically, because the couch is always more important than whatever he is supposed to be doing right now. At home, Homer's life organizes itself around a very short list of things: beer, donuts, television, sleep, and food in general. His relationship to all of these things is not casual enjoyment. It is closer to devotion. When Homer sees a donut, or smells something coming from a kitchen, or spots a cold beer on a counter, the show gives him a sound effect, a low, warm, almost musical rumble of anticipation. That has become one of the most recognized sounds in television history. It is the sound of a person for whom the prospect of consuming something is the highest form of excitement available. More than 100 separate instances of that sound have been cataloged across the show's run. More than 100 moments where Homer's entire being lights up at the prospect of putting something in his mouth. Nietzsche's last man, he wrote, is the individual who specializes not in creation but in consumption, who lives in the most comfortable era in human history and mistakes that comfort for achievement, who has replaced the question of what to build or become with the simpler and more manageable question of what to eat, what to watch, what to drink next. Homer Simpson, described in the show's own materials, is crude, overweight, incompetent, dim-witted, and a borderline alcoholic. His creator, Matt Groening, has described him as completely ruled by his impulses. The actor who voices him, Dan Castellaneta, has said he thinks of Homer as a dog trapped in a man's body, incredibly loyal, not entirely clean, but lovable. And that description is more accurate than it might first seem, because a dog is not a creature that sets goals or builds things or asks hard questions about the purpose of its existence. A dog wants what it wants when it wants it, and when it gets what it wants, it is happy, and when the thing is gone, it wants it again. There is no deeper level. There is just the wanting and the getting and the wanting again. This is Homer, and this is Nietzsche's last man. The same portrait drawn from two very different directions, arriving at the same face. But here is what makes the comparison interesting rather than just insulting. Nietzsche was not describing a weak person. The last man is not someone who tried to be great and failed. He is someone for whom the question of greatness has simply stopped being interesting. And Homer Simpson, in the golden years of The Simpsons, the first 8 seasons where the show is sharp and specific and genuinely observant, is not portrayed as a failure. He is portrayed as a man who has found a workable arrangement with the universe and sees no reason to renegotiate it. He has a wife who loves him despite everything. He has 3 children who, in various ways and to varying degrees, still need him. He has a house. He has a job he cannot be fired from, protected by union rules so dense that even his own boss, the most powerful man in Springfield, cannot get rid of him. He has Moe's Tavern a short drive away and a refrigerator full of duff at home. By every measure of comfort, Homer Simpson is winning. Not winning in the way Nietzsche admired, not winning in the sense of having built something something, created something, overcome something, but winning in the sense of having secured a position of maximum ease with minimum effort and staying there. Nietzsche wrote that the society of the last man would be one where no tall tree could grow anymore, where the soil had become too poor and too managed and too safe to support anything that reaches upward. He was not talking about trees, he was talking about people, the kind of people who, when they see someone reaching for something difficult and unfamiliar, feel not inspired but vaguely suspicious. The last man, Nietzsche said, is ineradicable. He lives the longest because the conditions that threaten people who take risks do not apply to someone who never takes any. Homer Simpson has, by the count of one character in the show, cheated death more than 300 times. He has fallen down Springfield Gorge repeatedly. He has been to space. He has eaten food that should have killed him. He has survived situations that destroyed or broke every realistic character the show ever placed next to him. And he comes back every episode to the same couch, in the same house, reaching for the same beer. Unchanged, unscathed, impossible to finish. What the show understood, at its best, was that Homer's indestructibility was not a superpower. It was a warning. The last man, Nietzsche wrote, lives longest. He outlasts the Frank Grimeses of the world, the people who tried, who cared, who built their lives around the idea that effort and excellence produce reward. He outlasts them not because he is stronger, but because the world, over time, gets reorganized around his preferences. Comfort is optimized. Risk is reduced. The things that challenged people stop challenging them. And in the absence of challenge, in the long, warm afternoon of total security, what grows is not wisdom or greatness or the kind of people Nietzsche spent his career hoping for. What grows is Homer. The Sunday Times, writing about Homer Simpson, called him every age's great consoling failure, its lovable, pretension-free mediocrity. That is a kind description. It is meant warmly, but read it again. Consoling failure. We are not inspired by Homer. We are consoled by him. He makes it feel okay to not be more, to not reach further, to stay on the couch one more night because what is the point of leaving it, really? He makes the small life feel like a reasonable choice rather than a surrender. That is exactly what Nietzsche was afraid of. Not the villain, not the monster, the consoler. The man whose very existence reassures everyone around him that they are fine where they are, that the couch is enough, that the beer is enough, that this is what happiness looks like, and all you have to do is blink when you say it. Nietzsche presented the last man as a warning that he expected would horrify people. He was wrong about that, too. When Zarathustra described this creature to the crowd, they didn't recoil. They asked to become him. When the Simpsons introduced Homer to the world, we didn't laugh at him from a distance. We moved in next to him. We put his face on our mugs and our t-shirts and our phone cases. We quoted him. We named ourselves after him. USA Today, in 2007, listed him as one of the 25 most influential people of the previous 25 years. A professor at Syracuse University said that 3 centuries from now, English professors would regard Homer Simpson as one of the greatest creations in human storytelling. Maybe they will, but it is worth asking what it says about the storytelling of a civilization that its greatest creation is a man who is most himself when he is doing nothing at all. Nietzsche gave the last man his warning in 1883. The Simpsons gave him his face in 1989. And the face turned out to be so warm, so familiar, so deeply comfortable that an entire generation made it the symbol of everything they found relatable about being alive. What that generation ate, what they watched, what they wanted from an evening, all of it, slowly, started to look a little more like Homer. Not because the Simpsons made them that way, But because Homer was already there, waiting in the shape of what the modern world had been quietly building toward for a century, and the show was just honest enough to draw it in yellow, the last man has a name. It is Homer J. Simpson. And the reason that matters is not because Homer is bad, or because watching The Simpsons is bad, or because comfort is something to be ashamed of. It matters because Nietzsche's warning was never really about one man on one couch. It was about what happens to a whole civilization when that man becomes its ideal. Homer's couch is comfortable. The question Nietzsche was asking is what you give up by never getting off it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That question leads us directly to what Homer does when he is not on the couch, and to why those moments are, in their own quiet way, just as telling as the ones where he is. Section 2. The Pleasure Principle in a Yellow Body. There is an episode of The Simpsons from Season 7 called King Size Homer. It aired in November 1995. In it, Homer Simpson attends a company exercise session at the Springfield nuclear power plant, watches everyone around him do jumping jacks, and decides on the spot that he does not want to do this. Not just today, not just this week. He decides he does not want to do it ever again. So he comes up with a plan. The plan is to gain enough weight that he qualifies as disabled under plant policy, which would allow him to work from home using a remote terminal. The number he needs to hit is 300 pounds. He starts the episode at 239. He has 61 pounds to gain, on purpose, deliberately, with full knowledge of what he is doing to himself and to the people who would have to cover for him at work. He sets about this goal with more focus and energy than he brings to almost anything else in the show. He eats banana splits. He eats multiple Krusty Burgers in a single sitting. He stands in his bathroom and weighs himself and pumps his fist when the number goes up. His daughter Lisa, who is 8 years old, has to be the one to point out that what he is doing might be wrong. Homer's response is, "I'm not saying it isn't sleazy, honey." He gains the weight, he gets the accommodation, he sets up his home office. He fantasizes, in a brief daydream sequence, about sitting under a sun umbrella in his backyard while Marge brings him lemonade and beer and a bird pecks at his computer keyboard to do his job for him. This is his vision of the perfect life. Not accomplishment, not recognition, not even rest after hard work, just the total removal of any requirement to exert himself, delivered to him while he sits outside in the sun. This is not a random or exaggerated episode. It is one of the most precise portraits the show ever gave us of what Homer actually wants from being alive, stripped of any softening or excuse. And what he wants, stated plainly, is a life from which all difficulty has been removed. Nietzsche had a word for the force that drives this kind of existence. He called it the opposite of the will to power, where the will to power pushes a person outward and upward, toward challenge, toward growth, toward becoming something they were not before. Homer's engine runs in the other direction entirely. Every choice Homer makes in King Size Homer is a choice away from difficulty and toward ease. Every single one. He does not weigh up the costs and decide the comfort is worth it. He does not struggle with the decision. The costs do not register. The ease is simply what he wants, and wanting it is enough. The show understands this about Homer so well that it built it into the opening sequence that plays at the start of every single episode. Homer is at work. The whistle blows. The moment the workday ends, Homer grabs a piece of radioactive material he was supposed to handle properly, looks around once, and stuffs it down the back of his shirt. He walks to his car. He drives home. He arrives at the exact same moment as the rest of his family from their different directions, and they all pile through the front door together, and Homer lands on the couch, and the television turns on, and that is the end. That sequence has played thousands of times across the show's run. It is the whole character in 30 seconds. Work ends. Homer leaves. Homer arrives at comfort. Homer stops moving. What makes this philosophically interesting, rather than just a description of a lazy cartoon character, is that Homer does not experience his life as lacking anything. This is the crucial point. A person who feels the absence of something and chooses comfort anyway is making a compromised choice. Homer is not making a compromised choice. He is making his ideal choice every time, without conflict and without regret. He sits on the couch and he is genuinely, thoroughly okay. The beer tastes good. The television is on. His wife is nearby. What else would there be? Sigmund Freud, the famous psychologist who spent his career mapping out how the human mind works, described something he called the pleasure principle. The idea was simple. At the most basic level, the human mind wants pleasure and wants to avoid pain. Babies operate almost entirely on this basis. They cry when something hurts and stop crying when it stops hurting. As people grow up, they develop what Freud called the reality principle, which is the ability to delay satisfaction, to tolerate some discomfort now in order to get something better later. Most adults operate through a combination of both. They want pleasure, but they can hold off, plan ahead, and do the hard thing today for the reward tomorrow. Homer operates almost entirely on the pleasure principle alone. There is no delay. There is no long view. There is what feels good right now and the movement toward it. In Homer vs. Patty and Selma, a season 6 episode from 1995, Homer invests the family's savings in pumpkin futures, not because he researched it or thought it through, but because he got excited about it in the moment. He forgets to sell the pumpkins before Halloween when their value collapses because he got distracted. He then has to borrow money from his wife's sisters, people he despises, because the immediate impulse to invest felt good at the time and the consequences of it were too far away to factor in. He does not learn from this. The next impulse will arrive and he will follow it the same way. The 2006 book, The Psychology of the Simpsons, a real academic collection edited by a professor of psychology named Alan Brown and published by Ben Bella Books, brought together actual psychologists and therapists to analyze the show's characters using real psychological ideas. Multiple contributors identified Homer's psychology as dominated by what Freud described as the id, the part of the mind that runs purely on desire and avoidance, that has no moral compass of its own, that simply wants what it wants and pushes toward it without checking whether the want is reasonable or the timing is right or the cost to other people is acceptable. The book was not making a joke. It was noting that Homer Simpson, as a character, had been written with enough consistency and psychological accuracy that real concepts from real psychology applied to him cleanly. His impulsiveness is not random. It follows a pattern. The pattern is, does this feel good right now or does it not? If it feels good, Homer moves toward it. If it does not, Homer moves away from it. That is essentially the whole decision-making framework. What Nietzsche was describing with The Last Man is something very close to this, but with a philosophical dimension added on top. The last man is not just someone who chases pleasure. He is someone who has organized his entire understanding of what a life is around the idea that pleasure is the point. He has not settled for comfort because he tried for more and failed. He has decided, at some level below conscious thought, that more is not worth the trouble, that the trouble itself is the problem, that a life with less trouble in it is simply a better life, and there is no further question to be asked about it. Homer decides this fresh every single day without knowing he is deciding it. It is baked into him so deeply that it does not feel like a choice. It feels like common sense. There is a moment in King-Size Homer where Marge sits across from Homer at the kitchen table and begins to list the reasons why gaining weight on purpose is a bad idea. She says it is endangering his health. Homer responds that he is now drought and famine resistant. She says he is setting a bad example for the children. He says at least he does not have to go to work. She says he is running the air conditioner non-stop. He cannot come up with a response to that one, so he just sort of trails off. This exchange is funny because it is absurd. It is also a precise map of how Homer's mind works. Every consequence Marge raises, Homer translates into its comfort implication. Health risk becomes drought resistance. Bad example becomes freedom from commuting. Each thing that should register as a cost becomes, in Homer's processing of it, either neutral or a secret benefit. Nietzsche wrote that the last man cannot despise himself. That is the specific phrase he uses. The most despicable man, he that is no longer able to despise himself. It sounds like a harsh thing to say, but what Nietzsche means by it is something precise. To despise yourself, in the way he is using the word, is to measure yourself against a standard and find yourself short. It is the internal experience of recognizing that you could be more than you are. The person who can feel that gap between what they are and what they could become still has the raw material for growth. They have a standard. They have something they are reaching toward, even if they are not reaching yet. Homer has no gap. He measures himself against his current desires and finds that he is meeting them. He is hungry and he is eating. He is tired and he is sitting. He is bored and the television is on. The standard and the reality are the same. There is no space between them for the kind of discomfort that drives people to change. This is not stupidity exactly. Stupidity would mean Homer cannot understand the gap. Homer understands it when someone explains it to him. In King-Size Homer, when everything goes wrong at the power plant and there is an emergency that only he can address, Homer does get up. He does act. He does, in his stumbling and accidental way, prevent a disaster. He is capable of rising to something when the stakes are right in front of him. But the moment the stakes are gone, so is the rising. The couch is right there. The crisis has passed. Why would he stay standing? This is one of the key things that separates Homer from simply being a cartoon of a lazy person. He is not lazy because he lacks the ability to act. He is comfortable because he has decided that acting is not worth it unless something forces the issue. The difference between those two things is enormous. A lazy person is someone who cannot get up. Homer is someone who has decided that getting up is for people who have not yet figured out that the couch is available. Nietzsche believed that the deepest drive in living things was not survival and not pleasure, but what he called the will to power. The drive to grow, to overcome, to build, to become. He thought this drive was present in everything alive, and that suppressing it, redirecting it entirely into safe and comfortable channels, produced exactly the kind of person he was warning about. Not a monster, but a shrinkage. A person who used to be pointing upward and has slowly, comfortably turned to point inward. Homer pointed inward so long ago that no one in Springfield remembers him pointing anywhere else, and the show never suggests he suffers for it. He is warm. He loves his family in his stumbling way. He has moments of genuine sweetness. He is not a bad man. But watch him in King-Size Homer. Watch him step on the scale and cheer as the number goes up. Watch him eat the Play-Doh donut his infant daughter made him because it pushes him 5 more pounds toward his goal. Watch him set up his home workstation with the single plan of having a bird press keys so he does not have to. And you are watching something Nietzsche described with great precision more than 100 years before the episode aired. You are watching a person who has replaced the question of what to become with the simpler and more more satisfying question of what to consume next, who has taken the entire energy of a human life and aimed it, with surprising dedication, at the achievement of maximum ease. The pleasure principle in a yellow body, running perfectly, running happily, running without a single moment of doubt about whether this is what a life is supposed to look like. The episode ends, as all Simpsons episodes end, with Homer back where he started. The wait does not stay. The home office does not stay. The crisis passes and the reset arrives, and by the next week, Homer is back at the plant, back in the opening credits, back to stuffing the radioactive material down his shirt when the whistle blows. The pleasure principle does not produce a destination. It produces a loop. You want, you get, you want again. The loop runs forever. Nothing is built, nothing accumulates. The wanting and the getting and the wanting again. And yet the Springfield nuclear power plant, which Homer nearly destroyed in King Size Homer through his complete indifference to his own job, is still running. Homer is still employed. No consequences that stick, no lessons that take. The loop continues. Nietzsche thought the last man was ineradicable. He lives the longest, he wrote, because the world stops producing things that can harm him. Homer Simpson has been on television for over 35 years and has not changed in any way that matters. He is exactly who he was in 1989, comfortable, content, reaching for the next thing without thinking about why. But here is what King Size Homer does not show you, and what the show saves for one of its darkest and most important episodes. What happens when a real person, someone from outside the bubble of Springfield, someone who actually believes that effort produces reward and that the world should make sense, walks in and sees Homer for exactly what he is. That person exists. He has a name. And his story with Homer is the most honest thing The Simpsons ever put on screen. Section 3. The show puts Nietzsche on trial. On May 4th, 1997, The Simpsons aired an episode that made some of its own writers uncomfortable. It divided the people who made it. One executive producer said it was in bad taste. Another said it was among his favorites he had ever worked on. Matt Groening, the man who created the show, ranked it as his 6th favorite episode of the entire series. The audience was split too. Some people said it was the last great episode the show ever made. Others said it was the moment the show lost its soul. The episode was called Homer's Enemy. It was written by John Swartzwelder, directed by Jim Reardon, and it is currently, as of 2024, ranked number 1 out of every episode The Simpsons has ever produced on IMDb, with a rating of 9.3 out of 10. It is the highest rated episode of the highest rated animated show in television history, and it is, underneath its humor, a direct dramatization of the exact argument Nietzsche was making about the last man, not by accident, by design. The episode opens with a news segment about a man named Frank Grimes. The segment is warm and admiring. Frank Grimes, the reporter explains, was abandoned by his parents at the age of 4. He grew up with nothing and no one. He never went to school because he had to work instead, delivering packages as a child so he could eat. As a teenager, there was a silo explosion near where he lived. He was badly injured. During his recovery, alone and without anyone helping him, he taught himself. He studied. He got a diploma through night school. He put himself through college. He earned a degree in nuclear physics. The week after he received his degree, he was featured on a local news program called Kent's People, a segment about ordinary people who had done extraordinary things through sheer determination. Mr. Burns, the owner of the Springfield nuclear power plant, saw the segment and was impressed. He called his assistant Smithers and said to bring this man in and hire him. Then Burns saw a different segment on the same channel. This one was about a heroic dog. The dog had saved a child from being hit by a car. Burns forgot about Frank Grimes immediately and gave the job he had promised him to the dog instead. Frank Grimes was assigned, as a kind of consolation, to work in Sector 7G of the nuclear plant, alongside Homer Simpson. This is the setup the writers constructed, and it is worth sitting with for a moment, because it is not just a plot device. It is a precise statement about how the world works for the Frank Grimeses of the world versus the Homer Simpsons. Frank earned everything he has through effort and pain and years of quiet, grinding work. The moment he was about to receive recognition for that work, a dog got there first, not through merit, but through a random accident of timing and charm. Frank gets assigned to the least desirable position in the plant, next to a man who got his position through no discernible merit whatsoever. Frank Grimes, from the very first moment of the episode, is a person for whom the world is supposed to make sense. He believes, at a level so deep it might as well be his religion, that effort produces reward, that competence is recognized, that the people who work harder and know more and care more end up doing better than the people who do not. This belief is not naive. He earned it. He built his entire life on it. Every hard year of his childhood, every night of studying when he could have been sleeping, every sacrifice, all of it was made in service of this belief, that it would be worth it, that it would add up to something. Homer Simpson is the proof that it does not. When Frank first encounters Homer at the plant, the frictions are immediate. Homer reaches into Frank's lunch, which Frank has labeled with his name, because Frank is the kind of person who labels things, and eats his special diet food without asking. Homer uses Frank's personalized stationery to doodle on. Homer falls asleep at his station. Homer, Frank quickly discovers, is not merely bad at his job. Homer is the specific kind of person who has never had to be good at his job, because nothing at the plant actually requires Homer to be competent. The plant runs despite Homer, the way a river runs around a large rock. The rock is always there, the water always gets past it. Nobody removes the rock. Frank tries to talk to Homer's coworkers about this. He approaches Lenny and Carl, Homer's two closest friends at the plant, and describes what he has been observing. Homer is dangerous, Frank says. Homer is incompetent. Homer is a safety hazard in a facility that handles material capable of contaminating an entire city. Lenny and Carl listen. Then they shrug. Homer's a good guy, they say. You'll get used to him. This response is what breaks Frank. Not immediately, but in pieces over the course of the episode, because he cannot get used to Homer. Not because he is a bad person, but because getting used to Homer would require him to abandon every belief he built his life on. To accept Homer as normal, as just a guy, just a coworker, just someone you work around, Frank would have to stop believing that the world rewards effort. And if the world does not reward effort, then what was any of it for? What were all the nights of studying? What was the pain? What justified the sacrifice? Homer, for his part, tries to be friendly. This is important, and the show is careful about it. Homer is not mean to Frank. Homer is not trying to make Frank's life difficult. Homer genuinely likes Frank, or tries to, in the dim and unfocused way Homer likes most things. He invites Frank to dinner. He shows Frank around his house. And showing Frank his house is where the episode turns from uncomfortable to something closer to devastating. Frank comes to the Simpsons' home for dinner, and Homer, with complete innocence, begins showing him around. He points to photographs on the wall. There is a picture of Homer with President Gerald Ford. There is a picture of Homer with the rock band The Smashing Pumpkins, taken when Homer was briefly on tour with them. There is a photograph of Homer in outer space, from the time NASA sent him up on a mission. Homer won a Grammy at some point. Homer has a dream house, a car, a beautiful wife, 3 children, and lobster for dinner. Frank Grimes, who has spent his entire life working working with focused intensity toward a reasonable and modest version of success, stands in this house and cannot process what he is looking at. He loses his composure completely. He tells Homer, in front of Homer's family, that Homer is everything that is wrong with America, that he coasts through life doing as little as possible and leeching off decent, hard-working people, that Homer does not deserve any of what he has. Frank then looks around the room at the photographs and the dinner and the comfortable house, and he says, "And do you deserve any of it?" No. Homer does not argue. Homer does not defend himself. Homer looks genuinely hurt in the simple and uncomplicated way Homer gets hurt. And then the moment passes and he is fine again, because Homer does not hold on to pain any more than he holds on to anything else that requires sustained attention. What Frank is doing in that scene, without knowing the philosophical language for it, is making Nietzsche's argument. He is standing inside the last man's house, surrounded by the last man's unearned rewards, and screaming that this is wrong, that this should not be how things work, that a person should have to become something in order to have something. And the show's response, not through dialogue, but through what happens next, is that Frank is correct and it does not matter. The plan Frank comes up with to expose Homer is to trick Homer into entering a model nuclear power plant design competition. The competition is for children. Frank assumes that when Homer submits a child-level design to a competition meant for children, while everyone else in the plant watches, the humiliation will finally be undeniable. Homer will be exposed as the fraud Frank has been insisting he is. Homer enters the competition. Homer wins. His design is mediocre, genuinely, straightforwardly mediocre, but the crowd cheers. Everyone at the plant cheers for Homer, not because his design is good, not because they are evaluating it carefully, because Homer is Homer, and Homer is theirs. And in Springfield, Homer is the kind of person the crowd instinctively rallies around. The same way Zarathustra's crowd cheered for the last man when they realized they could become him. The crowd does not want Frank Grimes to win. The crowd does not believe in what Frank Grimes believes in. The crowd has already decided, somewhere below the level of thought, that Homer's way is better, that Homer's ease is the thing worth wanting, that all of Frank's effort and striving and sacrifice is, at the end of the day, just exhausting. Frank Grimes watches the crowd cheer for Homer and breaks entirely. He begins walking through the plant acting like Homer, grabbing things without looking, ignoring safety protocols, treating the entire facility the way Homer treats it, as a background to his comfort rather than a place that requires his attention. He grabs a set of high-voltage electrical cables without safety gloves, the way Homer would, the way Homer does, the way Homer has always done and survived. And Frank Grimes dies instantly. The screen cuts to black and then to his tombstone. The funeral scene that closes the episode is the show at its most honest and its most brutal. The whole town is there. Reverend Lovejoy is speaking, and as Frank's coffin is being lowered into the ground, the camera finds Homer. Homer is asleep. His head is dropping. He is dreaming. And in his sleep he calls out to Marge to change the channel. The crowd laughs. Not cruelly. The crowd at the funeral laughs the way the crowd at a Homer moment always laughs, warmly, because Homer is Homer. Frank Grimes is in the ground, having been killed by his attempt to inhabit Homer's way of being, and Homer is asleep at his funeral, making the crowd laugh. And by the next episode, Homer will be back at work in Sector 7G, and no one will mention Frank Grimes again. John Swartzwelder, the writer of the episode, was asked about the ending in one of his very rare interviews. He is known for almost never giving interviews. He was asked whether he felt any sympathy for Frank Grimes, given how the episode treated him. His response was direct. Grimy was asking for it the whole episode, Swartzwelder said. He didn't approve of our Homer. That line is the key to everything the episode is doing. He didn't approve of our Homer. Not the Simpsons Homer, our Homer. The Homer that belongs to the audience, to the crowd, to Springfield, to the culture that created the show and watches it and loves it. Frank Grimes disapproved of what Homer represents. He disapproved of the world that produces Homer and rewards Homer and protects Homer. And for that, the episode destroys him. Nietzsche wrote that the last man's world would be one where total equality was maintained not through force, but through what he called the evil eye, through social pressure, through mockery, through the shared instinct of the crowd to pull down anyone who suggests that things should be different. Nobody physically stops Frank Grimes. Nobody punishes him directly. The world just keeps being the world, Homer's world, Springfield's world, and Frank cannot survive in it. His belief system is incompatible with the environment. The environment wins. The writer Bill Oakley, who came up with the original idea for the episode, said the intention was simple. Put a real person with a realistic personality into Homer's world and show what would happen. Josh Weinstein, who was the showrunner at the time, said they wanted to show what it would actually look like if a normal human being had to deal with Homer Simpson. The answer the episode gives is, they would not make it. A Vanity Fair writer ranked Homer's Enemy as the 7th best episode of The Simpsons ever made in 2007. The AV Club called it expertly written. The Guardian listed it among the best episodes the show ever produced. Warren Martin and Adrian Wood, who wrote one of the best-known books in the show's history, called it one of the series' darkest episodes, but also one of the wittiest and cleverest in ages. What nobody who loved the episode could quite agree on was whether to feel sad about Frank Grimes. And that unresolvable feeling is the point. Frank is right, Homer is wrong. The world belongs to Homer, and there is nothing Frank can do about any of it. Nietzsche did not say the last man was evil. He said the last man was the end of something, the end of the kind of human being who reaches upward, who sacrifices comfort for growth, who believes that what they become matters more than what they consume. Homer's Enemy is the show agreeing with Nietzsche, episode length, at full volume, and then cutting to a tombstone and moving on. The grave gets Frank's name wrong. The headstone at various points across the show's later seasons shows different inscriptions. In the original episode, it just says Grimes, which was Homer's lazy nickname for a man who introduced himself as Frank. Even in death, Frank Grimes does not get to be who he was. He gets to be what Homer called him. The last man outlasts everyone who objects to him. He outlasts them, Nietzsche said, because the world becomes his world, because the conditions of that world get quietly reorganized over time to suit his needs and his preferences and his way of being alive. Frank Grimes fought that world, and the world won without even trying. But the question the episode leaves open, the one that the show never fully answered, is whether Springfield, and by extension the culture watching it, understands what it lost when it cheered for Homer over Frank. Because what Springfield cheered for in that room, when Homer won the children's competition with a mediocre design, was not Homer exactly. It was something Homer represents, something deeper than one man's laziness or one crowd's loyalty. It was a whole way of seeing the world, a way that says comfort is enough, that ease is the goal, that the people who make things difficult by insisting things should be better are the real problem. And that thing, that way of seeing, has a name. It is older than Homer Simpson, and older than The Simpsons, and older than television itself. It is what happens when an entire group of people, not just one man, decide that the last man's life is the life worth wanting. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What that looks like in Springfield, how the whole town, not just Homer, operates on this principle, is what we need to look at next. Section 4. Consumption as Cosmology. What Homer's diet actually means. There is a sound that belongs entirely to Homer Simpson. It is not dough, though that is the one that made it into the Oxford English Dictionary in 2001. Dough is Homer's reaction to the world going wrong. The other sound, the one that comes before anything goes wrong, the one that arrives the moment Homer sees or smells or imagines something he wants to eat, is something closer to a long, low, deeply satisfied hum. The show writes it as Homer does not say it. It comes out of him, the way a sound comes out of a machine when it is doing exactly what it was built to do. Donuts. Beer. Pork chops. Something. Researchers who have tracked the show carefully have counted more than 100 separate instances of that sound across the series. More than 100 moments where Homer encounters the prospect of consuming something and his entire body responds before his brain has a chance to weigh in. The sound is not enthusiasm exactly. It is closer to recognition, the feeling of something slotting into place, of a need and its answer meeting each other in the same moment. Homer does not decide to want the donut. The want is already there, waiting, and the donut simply completes it. This is worth examining seriously because the show uses food and drink and television and all the other things Homer consumes, not just as comedy, but as character definition. What Homer puts into his body and how he responds to it and what he is willing to do to get it tells you more about who Homer is than almost anything else the show gives you. Start with the donuts. Homer's relationship to donuts is one of the most documented facts of his existence. He eats them at work, constantly, in quantities that are never specified because specifying them would make the joke smaller. He eats them at home. He eats them in his car. In one Treehouse of Horror segment from Season 5, broadcast in October 1994, Homer makes a deal with the devil, a literal deal in a Halloween story with an actual supernatural being, in exchange for a donut. The devil offers Homer his soul in exchange for the donut. Homer takes the deal. He eats the donut. Then, because he did not finish the entire donut, he hides the last piece in the back of the refrigerator and technically avoids completing the transaction. When he finds the piece later and eats it in his sleep, the deal is completed and the devil arrives to collect. Homer goes to hell. The devil's punishment for Homer is to force-feed him an infinite supply of donuts until he breaks. Homer does not break. He just keeps eating. The devil, eventually, gives up. This is a Halloween story. It is not meant to be taken literally. But the writers are making a choice when they construct a joke this way. They are saying something about what Homer values, what Homer would trade for, and what Homer's relationship to consuming things actually is. He would give up his soul for a donut. And when his punishment in hell is an endless supply of donuts, he receives it not as punishment, but as something close to paradise. The thing that was supposed to break him is the thing he wanted most. Now think about what that means as a picture of a person's inner life. The thing Homer would trade everything for is not connection, not meaning, not recognition, not love. It is a donut. And the thing that hell offers him, designed specifically to be the worst possible version of his desires, the desire amplified until it becomes torment, he simply absorbs. He cannot be punished through his appetites because his appetites have no bottom. There is no point at which Homer has had enough, and the consumption tip tips over into suffering. He just keeps going. Nietzsche's last man, he wrote, specializes not in creation, but in consumption. That phrase sounds simple, but it carries a very specific weight. Creation, in the way Nietzsche meant it, is not just making things. It is the act of putting your energy outward into the world, of taking what you have inside and turning it into something that did not exist before. Creation requires you to have a vision of something better than what currently exists. It requires you to tolerate discomfort in service of that vision. It requires you to defer the easy reward now for the more meaningful reward later. Creation is the defining motion of the Übermensch, the kind of person Nietzsche admired and believed humanity should be reaching toward. Consumption is the opposite motion. Energy comes in, nothing goes out. The person sits at the center of their own experience and pulls the world toward them, food, entertainment, comfort, and processes it and wants more of it. There is no vision. There is no outward movement. There is just the taking in of things and the wanting of more things to take in. Homer's entire life is organized around this inward motion. He does not build anything. He does not create anything. He does not even really aspire to create anything. When the show gives Homer moments of attempted ambition, they almost always end immediately when the first obstacle appears, and Homer returns to the couch. What he does, consistently and with genuine dedication, is consume. He eats, he drinks, he watches. He sits in front of things that provide sensation, and he experiences those sensations, and then he looks for the next one. Consider what a typical Homer evening looks like across the golden era of the show. He comes home from work, he opens the refrigerator and takes a beer. He sits on the couch. He turns on the television. He watches whatever is on. He may fall asleep. If Marge calls him to dinner, he goes to dinner. He eats, he returns to the couch. He has another beer. The television is still on. He may fall asleep on the couch instead of going to bed. In the morning, the routine resets. This is not a life organized around want in the ambitious sense. Want as longing, as drive, as the fuel for becoming something. This is want in its most basic form. Want as the body's reporting of its current condition. Hungry, thirsty, tired. Each signal arrives and Homer addresses it and waits for the next one. There is no signal for more. There is no internal voice saying, "This is not enough. I should be doing something with my life. I am not who I could be." That voice is simply absent. Now go back to the Treehouse of Horror segment from Season 5. The specific episode is called Treehouse of Horror 5, and it contains 3 separate Halloween stories. The most celebrated of these is a parody of the Stanley Kubrick film The Shining, called The Shinning in the show to avoid legal issues. In this story, the Simpson family is hired as caretakers at Mr. Burns's remote mountain lodge for the winter. Burns, as part of the arrangement, cuts off 2 things at the lodge: the cable television signal and the beer supply. Both of these things, Burns explains, are to ensure that the caretakers work hard rather than sitting idle. The moment Homer discovers there is no television and no beer, something shifts in him that the episode treats as a horror story development. The same kind of shift that happens in the original film when the character Jack Torrance begins to lose his grip on sanity. Homer starts behaving erratically. He becomes dangerous. He chases his family through the lodge with an axe. Marge finds the manuscript Homer has been working on at his typewriter. In the original Kubrick film, the revelation that the character has been typing the same sentence over and over is one of cinema's most disturbing images. The show uses the same structure. Marge opens Homer's manuscript and reads what he has been writing, page after page after page. No TV and no beer make Homer go crazy. The joke lands because it is absurd. The episode is a Halloween story, a parody, a piece of comedy horror. But the joke lands because it is also true. Homer without his consumption is not Homer slightly diminished. Homer without his consumption is Homer destabilized at the level of his personality. Take away the beer and the television, and what is left? The episode's answer is something dangerous, something that does not know what to do with itself, something that has been deprived of the only activities that give its days structure and meaning. Nietzsche asked a version of this question about the last man. What, he asked, would happen to a person who has organized their entire existence around comfort if you removed the comfort? He did not think the answer would be growth. He did not think the person would suddenly discover what they had been missing and begin reaching upward. He thought the comfort had gone so deep, had become so completely the architecture of the person, that without it there was nothing, no reserve of drive or vision or ambition to fall back on, because those things had never been developed. The space where they should have grown was already occupied. By ease, by routine, by the next small pleasure and the one after that. Homer's consumption is not, in this reading, just a character trait or a source of jokes. It is Homer's entire relationship to the question of what a life is for. He has answered that question, without ever consciously asking it, by filling every available moment with the intake of things that feel good. The question never comes up again because there is no room for it. There is always another beer. There is always something on TV. The question of what it all adds up to simply does not have a moment in which to appear. The show understands this. The writers of the Golden Era knew exactly what they were doing when they gave Homer the sound, when they built the Treehouse of Horror segment around the horror of Homer without his consumption. When they wrote King-Size Homer, about a man who deliberately ruins his health to maximize his access to comfort. These are not random comic choices. They are a consistent picture of a person whose inner life has been fully replaced by an outer loop of wanting and getting. What makes Homer different from a character who is simply written as greedy or gluttonous is that Homer does not know he is doing it. Greed requires some awareness of taking more than you should. Homer has no such awareness. He is not taking more than he should. He is taking exactly what he wants, and what he wants is everything available. And the idea that there is a should involved does not present itself to him. He is a person for whom the moral question attached to consumption has simply never occurred. Nietzsche wrote about the last man making everything small. That phrase, making everything small, is about reduction. It is about a person whose presence in the world does not expand things, but contracts them, who encounters the scale of human existence and its possibilities, and brings them down to the level of what can be eaten and watched and felt right now. The universe is large. The couch is comfortable. Homer chooses the couch every time, without drama or anguish, because the universe is far away and the couch is right here. This smallness is not vicious. Homer is not a cruel person. He is warm and he is loyal and he loves his family in the particular way he is capable of loving things, intensely in the moment and then distracted by the next moment. His smallness is not the smallness of a person who decided to be small. It is the smallness of a person who was never asked to be anything larger, and who found that the available size fit him just fine, and who stopped looking for a bigger room. The sound is the sound of that fit, of the want and its object meeting each other with perfect, frictionless ease, of a life that has been precisely calibrated to remove the gap between desiring something and having it, of a human being who has, without knowing it, answered one of the oldest and most serious questions, what are we here to do, with the simplest and most comfortable answer available. We are here to eat the donut. We are here to drink the beer. We are here to watch whatever is on, and to fall asleep to it, and to wake up and want it again. Nietzsche wrote that the last man blinks when he says he has discovered happiness. Homer does not blink. He does not need to. The blink, in Nietzsche's description, is the tell, the small involuntary signal that something underneath the contentment knows it is not quite enough. Homer does not have that tell. The contentment goes all the way down. There is no something underneath that knows anything different. And that, in Nietzsche's view, is not the best possible version of happiness. It is its most diminished form. Not because pleasure is wrong or comfort is shameful, but because a life that consists entirely of consumption, with nothing built and nothing created and nothing overcome, is a life that the universe passes through without leaving a mark. Homer watches the television. The television does not watch back. The donut is eaten. The donut does not remember being eaten. Nothing accumulated, nothing left behind. Just the and the next and the one after that. But for all the clarity the couch gives us about who Homer is, it is what happens when Homer leaves the couch, when ambition briefly arrives, when some version of wanting more flickers across his face. That shows us something even more precise about what Nietzsche was warning against. Underscore, quote, underscore, for, underscore. Because Homer has tried more times than you might remember, and what those attempts reveal is something the couch alone cannot show you. Section 5. The herd endorses Homer, Springfield as Nietzsche's predicted society. The most disturbing moment in Homer's enemy is not Frank Grimes dying. It is the moment just before it, when Frank stands in the middle of the nuclear plant and points at Homer and tells everyone around him, Lenny, Carl, the other workers, anyone who will listen, that this man is a fraud, that this man should not have what he has, that the way this man lives and works and gets away with everything is wrong. And the people around him look at Frank, and then they look at Homer, and they choose Homer, without hesitation, without debate. They choose Homer every single time. Lenny and Carl, Homer's two closest friends, are not bad people. The show never writes them as villains or as stupid. They are ordinary working men who have spent years alongside Homer in Sector 7G, and they like him. They have adjusted to him. They have built a picture of the world that includes Homer's way of being as a normal and acceptable thing. And Frank Grimes arrives and tells them that picture is wrong, and they cannot hear it. Not because they have thought about it and disagree, but because the picture is too settled. Homer is Homer. Homer is theirs. Homer is fine. This is not a Springfield problem. This is the whole point. Nietzsche wrote that the last man does not exist alone. He exists inside a herd, a group of people who have, collectively and without any single decision being made, agreed to organize themselves around comfort and sameness, and the rejection of anything that makes too large a demand. The herd is not cruel. The herd is not even conscious of what it is doing. It simply gravitates, the way water finds its level, toward the arrangement that requires the least from everyone. And when someone appears who insists that more should be required, who says that effort should be rewarded, that excellence should be recognized, that the people who coast through life on luck and ease should at some point face a reckoning, the herd does not engage with the argument. It just makes the person making it feel alone. Frank Grimes is made to feel alone in Springfield from his first day, not through anyone's deliberate cruelty, but through the specific social texture of a town that has fully adapted to Homer's world. Mr. Burns cannot remember Homer's name. He has referred to Homer throughout the series as Simpson, or by the wrong name entirely, or simply as that man. And yet Homer keeps his job, keeps his salary, keeps his position, because the plant's bureaucracy has absorbed Homer the way a river absorbs a rock. The union protects him. The incompetence of the institution accommodates him. The world around Homer has reorganized itself, slowly and without announcement, to make Homer's continued existence there not just possible, but stable. Frank notices this. Frank cannot stop noticing this, and the noticing is what kills him in the end, more than any single event. Because Springfield does not fight Frank. Springfield does not argue with Frank. Springfield simply continues being Springfield, warm, chaotic, Homer-centered, and Frank cannot find a foothold in it. There is nowhere for his worldview to land. In the scene where Homer invites Frank to dinner, the dinner itself is not a trick. Homer is genuinely trying to extend friendship. He shows Frank his Grammy Award. He shows him the photo with the president. He shows him the astronaut picture. Homer is proud of these things in the uncomplicated way Homer is proud of anything. Not boastfully, but with the simple pleasure of someone who has accumulated interesting experiences and wants to share them. He does not understand that each photograph is another piece of evidence that the world Frank believes in does not exist. That a man like Homer, incompetent, disinterested, coasting, somehow ended up in space and in the White House and on a stage accepting a music award, while Frank, who has dedicated his life to genuine effort and genuine skill, is eating a special diet lunch alone at a plant he was nearly not hired at because a dog got the job first. After Frank's breakdown, after he walks through the plant ignoring every safety rule, after he grabs the electrical cables and dies, the town gathers for his funeral. The funeral scene is brief. Reverend Lovejoy reads a few words, the coffin is lowered, the camera moves through the crowd of mourners and finds Homer, and Homer is asleep. His head is drooping. He is dreaming something, and in his sleep he says, quietly but clearly, "Change the channel, Marge." The crowd laughs. Everyone at the funeral laughs at Homer being Homer at Frank Grimes's funeral. They cannot help it. It is a Homer moment, and Homer moments make Springfield laugh, because Springfield has been calibrated over many years to find Homer's behavior not outrageous, but endearing. The dead man in the box was someone who found Homer's behavior outrageous. He is in the box. Homer is asleep, making people smile. Nietzsche, in Beyond Good and Evil, wrote that the society of the last man would produce what he called the incurably mediocre. People who alone have a real prospect of continuing and spreading because the world has been shaped around their needs. He wrote that this world would have no sharp distinctions anymore between the strong and the weak, the excellent and the ordinary. Everything would be leveled, not through violence, but through the slow and steady preference of the group for arrangements that do not ask too much of anyone. Springfield is that world. Not a nightmare version of it, a warm, funny, deeply recognizable version of it. The show does not present Springfield as a place of obvious failure. Springfield has a functioning town government, a school, a church, a nuclear plant, a police department, a hospital. The infrastructure of civilization is all there, but underneath it, running through every institution, is the operating assumption that Homer's level is the level, that getting by is getting along, that the person who insists otherwise is the problem. This is what makes the episode so hard to shake. John Swartzwelder, the writer, was once asked about the dark ending and whether he felt the show had been too cruel to Frank. His answer was, Grimy was asking for it the whole episode. He didn't approve of our Homer. That word, our, is doing everything. Frank did not just fail to approve of Homer the individual. He failed to approve of Homer the shared arrangement. The deal that Springfield had made with itself, that the crowd at Zarathustra's speech had made with themselves when they cheered for the last man. This is enough. This is fine. This is what we want. Frank Grimes refused the deal. The deal refused him back. What the show adds to Nietzsche's picture, something the philosopher could not have known, is the role of affection in all of this. Nietzsche described the herd's enforcement of mediocrity as something driven by what he called the evil eye, by envy and resentment directed at anyone who rises above the agreed level. And that is part of Springfield. But Springfield does something more specific and, in some ways, more insidious. Springfield does not resent Homer. Springfield loves Homer. The enforcement of Homer's world is not cold or hostile. It is warm. It happens through laughter and loyalty and the deep, genuine fondness that Lenny and Carl and Marge and the town as a whole feel for this man who cannot do his job and never will. That warmth is what makes it so hard to object to. If Springfield were hostile and cold, Frank would have had somewhere to point. He could have said, "Look at how they treat me. Look at how unwelcoming this place is." But Springfield is welcoming. Springfield welcomed Frank on his first day. Homer tried to befriend him immediately. The town is full of people who are decent in their individual dealings and who collectively produce an environment in which Frank Grimes cannot breathe. Nietzsche's warning about the herd was never that herd members were mean. The warning was that they were comfortable, that the comfort was the mechanism, that a world organized around ease and warmth and the acceptance of everyone at whatever level they naturally occupy is a world that makes no room for the kind of person who believes levels matter, who believes some ways of living are genuinely better than others, who cannot stop seeing the gap between what is and what could be. Frank Grimes saw the gap. Springfield did not. Springfield had stopped looking for it a long time ago, somewhere around the time Homer Simpson arrived and everyone decided, one by one and then all at once, that Homer was fine. Homer is fine. Homer has always been fine. The town decided this together, without a meeting or a vote, the way herds decide things, through the slow accumulation of moments in which no one said otherwise. And if Springfield is the herd, and Homer is the last man the herd has built itself around, then the question becomes, what happens when Homer actually tries to be something more? What happens in the episodes where ambition arrives, where Homer reaches for something bigger than the couch? __quote _5 __. The answer is one of the most precise things the show ever did, and it requires us to look at not one episode, but many, at the pattern that emerges when you step back and watch all of Homer's attempts at becoming laid out in a row. Section 6. Deep Space Homer. The last man goes to space and nothing changes. In February 1994, The Simpsons aired an episode called Deep Space Homer. It is Season 5, Episode 15. It was written by David Merkin, who was the executive producer of the show at the time, and it remains one of the most celebrated episodes the series ever produced. Empire magazine called it a contender for the greatest episode ever made. TV Guide put it on their list of the top 12 Simpsons episodes in 1998. In 2019, Time magazine ranked it 6th on their list of the 10 best Simpsons episodes as chosen by experts. NASA loved it so much that astronaut Edward Lu requested a copy be sent to the International Space Station on a supply ship, where it remains available for astronauts to watch. It is also, underneath all of that celebration, one of the clearest pictures the show ever drew of exactly what Nietzsche was warning about. The episode begins not with Homer, but with NASA. The space agency is in trouble, and the trouble is specific. Nobody is watching their rocket launches anymore. The ratings for shuttle launches have collapsed. The American public, which once gathered around televisions to watch men go to space, has stopped caring. NASA's people sit around a conference table and try to figure out why. Their conclusion, delivered plainly and without softening, is that the American public resents competent people, that the clean-cut, highly trained, physically excellent astronauts NASA has been sending into space are people the average American cannot relate to and does not want to watch. that what the country actually wants to see in space is someone like them, someone ordinary, someone who has not achieved anything in particular and does not make anyone feel bad about themselves by comparison. Their solution is to find the most average, most ordinary, most unremarkable American they can and send him into space. They find Homer Simpson. This is the joke, and it is also the argument. NASA, an institution dedicated to human excellence, to the idea that through training and discipline and the pushing of human limits, people can do things that were previously impossible, decides that excellence is the problem, that the achievement of extraordinary things by extraordinary people has become alienating to a public that has drifted so far from any interest in that kind of striving that it now actively dislikes being reminded it exists. The solution is not to inspire the public towards something higher. The solution is to bring space down to where the public already is, to bring Homer up. At the plant, the episode opens with Homer watching the Worker of the Week award ceremony. Every employee at the Springfield nuclear power plant must win the award at least once, regardless of what the show's own script calls gross incompetence, obesity, or rank odor. This is written into the union agreement. Homer has never won it, not because he is being unfairly overlooked, but because the award has cycled through everyone at the plant, and Homer's turn simply has not come yet. His turn does not come in this episode either. Mr. Burns, at the ceremony, gives the Worker of the Week award to an inanimate carbon rod. A rod of carbon, an object. Homer watches his coworkers applaud an object receiving the recognition he has been waiting for, and feels, briefly and genuinely, that nobody respects him. This moment is important. Homer's desire for recognition is not ambitious in the Nietzschean sense. He does not want to be recognized for something he has built, or created, or overcome. He wants to be recognized because he feels he is owed it by default, the way the union agreement says he is owed the award, regardless of what he has done. His hurt at being passed over is real, but what he has been passed over for is simply being present, for existing at the plant long enough. The carbon rod, in winning the award, has beaten Homer at the only game Homer has ever been playing. He calls NASA to complain about something unrelated as a prank call from Moe's Tavern. NASA traces the call, arrives at the plant, and decides Homer is exactly what they are looking for. They invite him and Barney Gumble, Homer's closest friend, and a man whose defining characteristic is that he is drunk almost continuously, to compete for the astronaut slot. What happens next is the episode's most pointed joke. Barney, placed under NASA's training program and subjected to their no alcohol policy, transforms. Within days of sobriety, Barney becomes a different person. He regains his balance. He regains his coordination. He begins doing backflips. He recites complex poems from memory. He is physically capable, mentally sharp, and enthusiastic about the mission in a way that genuinely impresses the NASA scientists. He is, in short, what a person can become when they stop organizing their life around consumption and submit themselves to challenge and discipline instead. A NASA official watches Barney's transformation and tells Homer bluntly that while in some ways they are both winners, in another, more accurate way, Barney is the winner. Barney is chosen for the mission, Homer is not. Then Barney is offered a glass of champagne to celebrate. The champagne is non-alcoholic. Barney drinks it anyway and instantly, completely collapses back into his previous self. The smell of something that resembles alcohol is enough. He injures himself immediately. He is disqualified. Homer goes to space by default. The show is doing something very precise with Barney in this episode. It is showing in the span of about 3 minutes what human transformation looks like, and then showing in the span of about 30 seconds how completely and instantly it can be reversed when the underlying commitment was never really there. Barney did not choose to become better. He was placed into conditions that made better the only available option. The moment an alternative appeared, even a fake one, even a non-alcoholic one, he returned to exactly who he was before. The transformation had no roots. It was just circumstances wearing a person's face. Homer goes to space. He smuggles potato chips onto the shuttle because Homer being in space does not change what Homer wants, which is to eat something. He opens the bag of chips in zero gravity, and the chips float out and begin drifting through the cabin. The other astronauts panic. The chips are heading toward the navigation controls, the instruments that guide the shuttle back to Earth. Homer scrambles to catch the chips, eating as many as he can reach, and in doing so, accidentally destroys the navigation system. He then also accidentally fixes the problem. While panicking and grabbing at things, he shoves the carbon rod, the same inanimate carbon rod that beat him for Worker of the Week, into the broken door mechanism and holds it shut long enough for the shuttle to land safely. The mission is saved, not by Homer's competence or training or decision-making, by his panic and the rod. The rod becomes a hero. Time magazine, in the show's universe, puts the carbon rod on its cover. The headline reads, "In Rod We Trust." There is a parade for the rod. The rod gets its own limousine. Homer watches from home, having returned from space, and turns off the television in frustration. He went to space. He saved the shuttle. The rod is getting the parade. This is the episode's final and most honest joke, and it is not really a joke. Homer went to space and came back exactly who he was before he left. He brought chips. He almost destroyed the mission. He accidentally saved it. He received no lasting recognition. The carbon rod received the recognition instead, because even in the moment of Homer's closest approach to genuine heroism, the heroism was not really his. It was the rod's. It was luck. It was accident. Homer was there, the way Homer is always there, present, eating something, surviving by default, returning to the couch. Nietzsche's concept of self-overcoming, the idea that the deepest human drive is to push past what you currently are and become something you were not before, requires that the thing you go through actually changes you, that the challenge leaves a mark, that you return from it different. Space does not change Homer. Homer goes to space and comes back wanting to watch television and being annoyed that the carbon rod is more famous than he is. This is not a failure of the episode. It is the episode's entire point. David Merkin, the writer, built the episode around Homer's attempts to earn his family's respect, something the show had Homer reach for periodically, the need to be seen as someone who matters to the people he loves. Bart, in the episode's opening, writes the words, "Insert brain here," on the back of Homer's head. After Homer returns from space, Bart writes "hero" on the same spot. The respect is real for a moment. It lasts approximately as long as the episode lasts. By next week, Homer is back at the plant, tossing the radioactive material down his shirt when the whistle blows. The episode is celebrated as one of the greatest things The Simpsons ever made, and it deserves that celebration. But what it is actually about, what it is doing underneath the jokes and the Buzz Aldrin cameo and the Planet of the Apes reference at the end, is showing you a man for whom the largest possible experience changes nothing, who can go to space and return to exactly the same life, the same couch, the same beer, without any of it accumulating into growth or change or the beginning of something new. The last man, Nietzsche wrote, lives the longest. He survives everything, not because he is strong, but because he is unchanged by what he survives. The things that should transform him simply pass through. Homer went to space. Homer came home. Homer wanted to watch TV. But space is one thing. Space is large and strange and genuinely outside normal experience. The more revealing test is not what Homer does when the world offers him something extraordinary. It is what Homer does when the world offers him something ordinary. A goal, a job, a small ambition. And what happens to that thing over time? __quote _7 __. Because Homer has tried, across 35 years of television, to become something more times than most people remember, and the pattern of those attempts tells you something that no single episode can show you on its own. Section 7. Homer's Failed Overcomings. Every arc that ends at the couch. There is a running joke among people who have watched The Simpsons for a long time. The joke is about Homer's jobs. Over the course of the show's run, Homer Simpson has held an almost uncountable number of positions outside his role as safety inspector at the nuclear plant. He has been a food critic, a farmer, a monorail conductor, a missionary, a boxer, a bodyguard, a hipster bar owner, a snowplow operator, a preschool teacher, a labor union leader, a personal shopper, a mayor's aide, a hair salon owner, an astronaut, which the previous section covered, a country music manager, a truck driver, a paparazzo, a carny, a hotel owner, a gun store owner, a member of a barbershop quartet that went platinum and won a Grammy. The joke is that none of it sticks. Every single week, Homer is back at the plant in Sector 7G, sitting at his station, eating a donut, falling asleep at the controls. The new job, or new identity, or new ambition disappears as completely as if it never happened. There is no accumulation. There is no growth. There is no version of Homer who is shaped by what he has been through. Most people who watch the show accept this as a convention of the format. Sitcoms reset. Characters do not change permanently because permanent change would eventually make the show unrecognizable. This is true, and it is a real explanation for why the structure works the way it does. But accepting that explanation too quickly misses what the show is actually doing with this pattern, which is something more specific and more honest than just a sitcom convention. The reset is not incidental to Homer's character. The reset is Homer's character. Nietzsche built his entire philosophy around the idea of self-overcoming. The word he used in German was Selbstüberwindung, and what it means, stripped of the German, is the act of going beyond what you currently are. Not just improving at something you already do, not just getting more comfortable in your current position, but genuinely pushing past the boundary of your present self into something that did not exist before. Nietzsche believed this drive, to become more than you are, to refuse to stay still, to treat your current self as a starting point rather than a destination, was the deepest and most important thing a human being could do. Homer attempts something like this regularly. The attempts are real. They are not always cynical or lazy at the start. When Homer becomes a food critic in Season 5, in the episode Selma's Choice, he genuinely enjoys it. When he takes up bowling more seriously, he is genuinely engaged. When he becomes the manager of a country music singer named Lurleen Lumpkin in the Season 3 episode Colonel Homer, he discovers a talent for recognizing something beautiful in another person's work. These are not fake interests. The show gives Homer real enthusiasm for new things when they first arrive, because Homer is a person who can be genuinely excited by novelty. The pleasure principle, after all, responds strongly to new sources of pleasure. The problem is what happens next, every time, without exception. The new thing requires sustained effort. It requires Homer to keep showing up, to keep caring, to keep pushing through the moments when it stops being exciting and starts being work. And Homer cannot do that. Not because he is physically incapable, but because the couch is right there, and the beer is cold, and the television is on, and the new thing, whatever it is now asking something of him that the couch never asks. The couch never asks anything. Look at the episode Homer the Great from Season 6. In it, Homer discovers that his co-workers Lenny and Carl belong to a secret fraternal organization called the Stonecutters, an ancient society with elaborate rituals and exclusive privileges. Homer is initially excluded. He eventually joins and discovers that, according to an ancient prophecy written on a sacred piece of parchment, he is the chosen one, the person who will lead the stonecutters to greatness. The entire organization reorganizes itself around Homer. He gets a robe, he gets a throne, he gets carried around on a platform by his fellow members. He is given everything the position offers without having done anything to earn it. Then, because Homer is Homer, he becomes bored. The position gives him everything except challenge, and without challenge, even the most elevated position becomes just another couch. He starts using his power as the chosen one to make the stonecutters do things for him that have no greater purpose, to get them to do his laundry, to build him a pool, to serve his immediate needs. The sacred brotherhood falls apart. Homer's leadership, which the prophecy promised would be transformative, produces nothing except a briefly improved domestic situation for one man. The episode is a perfect small model of the larger pattern. Homer is given a position of genuine importance and the possibility of building something meaningful with it. He turns it into a comfort delivery system. The position collapses. Homer returns to baseline. Or look at Homer's Barbershop Quartet, a season 5 episode that takes place mostly in flashback. In the late 1980s, Homer was a member of a barbershop quartet called the B Sharps. The group became enormously successful. They recorded an album, toured, performed on national television, and won a Grammy Award. Homer has a Grammy. This is a real thing that happened to Homer Simpson within the show's history. He was, by any measure, genuinely successful at something creative, something that required skill and collaboration and sustained effort over time. And then the group broke up, the way groups break up. And Homer came home, and the Grammy went on a shelf, and life returned to its ordinary shape. When Homer shows the Grammy to Frank Grimes during the dinner scene in Homer's Enemy, he mentions it the same way he mentions the photo with the president and the picture from space, as one interesting item among several, no more weighted than any other. The Grammy is not something that changed Homer, it is something that happened to Homer. There is a difference, and Homer does not feel it. This is the key distinction. Things happen to Homer all the time. Extraordinary things, unusual things that would rearrange most people's understanding of themselves and their place in the world. Homer absorbs them without being changed by them the way a sponge absorbs water, taking them in, holding them briefly, and returning to its original shape the moment the pressure is released. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence is a thought experiment, not a claim about physics. The idea is simple. Imagine that your life, exactly as you have lived it, will repeat forever. Every moment, every choice, every day, again and again, endlessly. The question Nietzsche attached to this image was, how would you live if you knew that was true? Would the life you are living be one you would choose to repeat? Is there enough in it that you would say, yes, give me this again and again and again? For a person who has built something, who has grown, who has become more than they were, the eternal recurrence is a challenge, but not a horror. They can look at their life and find enough in it to affirm. For Homer, the eternal recurrence is simply accurate. Homer's life already repeats. It has always repeated. He goes to the plant. He comes home. He eats. He watches television. He sleeps. He goes to the plant. The extraordinary things, space, the Grammy, the stonecutters, all of it, arrive and pass through without leaving a mark, and the loop continues unchanged. Homer is already living Nietzsche's thought experiment. He just does not experience it as a thought experiment. He experiences it as a perfectly fine Tuesday. What makes this more than just a description of sitcom structure is what the show does with it intentionally. In the season 4 episode, Homer the Heretic, Homer decides to stop going to church. He stays home on Sunday morning alone while the rest of the family attends services. He makes his own waffle batter with his own recipe. He watches football. He dances in his underwear. He takes a nap. And he experiences this Sunday as one of the best days of his life. He tells God in a dream sequence that he found a whole new way to be, and it is wonderful. The episode eventually returns Homer to church through a fire at the house and a rescue by Ned Flanders. The message the episode officially delivers is about community and connection. But what it honestly shows for most of its running time is that Homer's ideal version of existence, the thing he would design if given complete freedom, is a day with no obligations, no other people making demands, no structure beyond his own appetite, waffles, football, sleep, the loop, uninterrupted, running perfectly. The show's writers during the Golden Era were aware of what they were building. David X. Cohen, one of the writers from that period, acknowledged in interviews that the reset structure was a conscious choice, that Homer could not be allowed to permanently change because the show depended on him being recognizably Homer every week. But the writers were also smart enough to use that constraint as a mirror rather than just a convenience. The reset was not just a necessity of television, it was a portrait of a specific kind of person, a person for whom growth does not accumulate, for whom experience does not compound, for whom every week begins fresh because nothing from the previous week has been built upon. Nietzsche called the last man the man who makes everything small. Every Grammy, every trip to space, every position of power or opportunity for genuine change, Homer makes it small, not through malice, through the simple and consistent return to what feels easiest. The couch calls, Homer answers. The extraordinary thing fades like a dream by morning. 35 years of television, dozens of jobs, one trip to space, a Grammy, a meeting with the president, a sacred prophecy, and Homer is still at the plant, still in Sector 7G, still reaching for the donut when the camera finds him. The loop is the point. The loop has always been the point. But if Homer alone were the loop, if it were just one man cycling endlessly through the same comfortable days, the essay would stop here. What makes the argument land harder is not Homer in isolation. It is us. What we did with Homer. What we made of him. What it says about the culture that watched him for 35 years and put his face on everything it owned. That is the question the next section asks, and the answer is more uncomfortable than Homer himself. Section 8. Homer versus the eternal recurrence. Would he say yes? Friedrich Nietzsche came up with one of the strangest and most demanding tests in the history of philosophy while walking through the Swiss Alps in August 1881. He described the moment in his notebooks as one of the most significant of his life. The idea that came to him on that walk became one of the central challenges of everything he wrote afterward. He called it the eternal recurrence. The test works like this. Imagine that a demon appears to you in your loneliest, quietest moment and tells you something. The demon says, "The life you are living right now, you will have to live again. Not once, not twice, infinitely, every moment of it, every good day and every bad one, every meal and every argument, every boring Tuesday afternoon and every significant night will repeat in exactly the same order forever. Nothing changes, nothing improves, nothing is added or removed. This life, as you have lived it, runs again and again like a film on a loop that never ends." Nietzsche's question attached to this image was simple. How do you feel about that? He was not asking whether you find the idea philosophically convincing. He was not asking whether you think it is literally true. He was using it as a mirror, a way of getting a person to look honestly at the life they are actually living and ask whether it is a life they would choose, freely and fully, to repeat. Whether there is enough in it, enough joy and meaning and genuine effort that they could say yes to the demon's offer. Yes, give me this again. Yes, I want all of it back. The person who can say yes, who has lived fully enough, created enough, loved enough, pushed hard enough against their own limits, that person has passed the test. Their life is one they have truly inhabited. The person who would say no, or who would feel a sinking dread at the demon's words, has been shown something important about how they have been spending their time. The eternal recurrence does not judge them. It simply shows them the truth of what they have built. Now ask the question about Homer Simpson. Would Homer say yes to the demon? The honest answer is that Homer would almost certainly not understand the question. Not because Homer is stupid exactly, but because the question assumes a level of reflection about one's own life that Homer does not engage in. Homer does not step back from his days and examine them. He lives inside them, moment to moment, pulled from one immediate sensation to the next, and the idea of evaluating the whole shape of it, of asking whether it adds up to something worth repeating, requires a kind of distance from yourself that Homer has never developed. But if we ask the question on his behalf, the answer becomes interesting in a way that Nietzsche would have recognized immediately. Homer would not say yes. He would not say no either. He would say, fine, whatever. And that answer, not enthusiastic yes, not horrified no, but the comfortable shrug of someone who has no strong feelings about their own life in either direction, is precisely what Nietzsche was most afraid of. Not the person who looks at the eternal recurrence and feels despair. Despair at least means the person can see the gap between what their life is and what it could be. Despair is the raw material for change. The person who feels despair at the demon's words has something to work with. Homer has no despair. Homer has no gap. Homer's contentment is so complete and so evenly distributed across every day that there is no moment of friction in which the question of whether this is enough could get any traction. The beer is cold, the television is on, the couch is where it has always been. What would the demon's question even mean to a person whose ideal life is simply the continuation of the life he is already living, at the same temperature, with the same snacks, indefinitely? Nietzsche wrote in a book called Ecce Homo that his formula for greatness in a human being was amor fati, a Latin phrase meaning love of fate. What he meant by it was a specific and demanding thing, not passive acceptance of whatever happens, not the shrug of someone who has given up caring. Amor fati, as Nietzsche described it, was the active, passionate embrace of your life in all its difficulty and pain and imperfection. The ability to look at everything that has happened to you, including the hard parts, and say yes to all of it. Not despite the difficulty, but including it. The difference between Homer's contentment and Nietzsche's amor fati is the difference between not minding your life and genuinely loving it. Amor fati requires you to have lived fully enough that there is something real to love. It requires you to have taken risks that produced both success and failure, to have reached for things that were difficult, to have allowed the world to actually touch you. The person who loves their fate has a fate worth loving, a life with shape and weight and consequence. Homer's life has comfort but not consequence. Things happen to him constantly. Almost nothing he does produces a lasting result. The Grammy does not change him. The space mission does not change him. The dozens of jobs and adventures and encounters with famous people and supernatural events do not change him. He returns from all of it to the same couch, the same beer, the same Tuesday. There is nothing to love in the Nietzschean sense because there is nothing that has accumulated into a life with direction. What Homer has is something closer to what Nietzsche called Russian fatalism, a term he used to describe a specific and passive kind of acceptance that he contrasted sharply with amor fati. Russian fatalism, as Nietzsche described it, is the acceptance of a soldier who has stopped fighting not because he has made peace with his situation, but because he is too exhausted and too depleted to resist it any further. It is acceptance without affirmation, tolerance without love. The soldier is not saying yes to his circumstances. He is simply no longer saying anything. Homer is not exhausted. Homer is not depleted, but the structure of his relationship to his own life is similar. He tolerates it without examining it. He accepts it without choosing it. He lives inside it the way a fish lives inside water. Not because the fish has decided that water is the ideal environment, but because water is simply where the fish is, and the fish has never been anywhere else, and the question of whether there might be something better has never presented itself. The eternal recurrence, as a thought experiment, is designed to make that question present itself. It is designed to force a confrontation between the life you are living and the life you could be living. It is designed to make you feel in your chest whether the days you are spending are days you would spend again. For Homer, the thought experiment fails, not because Homer answers it badly, because Homer cannot be reached by it. The demon appears in Homer's loneliest moment, and Homer's loneliest moment is when the television is between channels and there is nothing good on. The demon says, "You will live this life again, infinitely." And Homer says, "Okay, is there anything to eat?" The show captures this quality of Homer's most precisely in a season 5 episode called Homer the Heretic. Homer stays home from church one Sunday and has what he describes as the best day of his life. He makes his own waffle recipe, watches football, dances alone in his living room, and takes a long nap. He tells God directly in a dream sequence that he has found a new way to be, and it is wonderful. The episode treats this partly as comedy and partly as a genuine portrait of a man who has discovered that his ideal existence requires nothing from him and nothing from anyone else. Just the loop, running clean, without interruption. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence asks whether you would want your life again. Homer's Sunday in Homer the Heretic is already his answer. He would want it again. He wants it every week. The loop is not a horror to Homer. The loop is the goal. The repetition is not something he endures. It is something he has engineered, through every choice and every comfortable return to baseline, to run as smoothly as possible for as long as possible. The demon offers Homer his life on infinite repeat, and Homer's response is not yes or no. It is the sound, the low, satisfied hum of a person whose desires and their fulfillment have been so completely aligned that the question of whether any of this is enough simply does not arise. And that specific quality of contentment without reflection, of comfort without the capacity to want more, is what Nietzsche identified as the most complete form of the last man's existence. Not suffering, not unhappiness, something quieter and in its own way more final. A life that loops without question, forever, because the person living it has never developed the tools to ask whether it should. Homer would not be horrified by the eternal recurrence. He would be fine with it. And Nietzsche spent his career arguing that being fine with it is the one thing a person genuinely should not be. But here's the thing that makes this more than just a philosophical argument about one fictional character. Homer did not create this quality in himself. Something gave it to him. Something produced a man this comfortable, this unquestioning, this perfectly calibrated to accept the loop without resistance. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That something is what we have to look at next. Section 9. The Audience Problem. Why we love what Nietzsche warned us about. In 2007, USA Today published a list of the 25 most influential people of the previous 25 years. The list included real human beings who had shaped culture, politics, science, and public life in measurable ways. It also included Homer Simpson. Not Matt Groening, who created him. Not the writers who gave him his voice and his stories. Homer Simpson himself, as if he were a real person who had done real things in the real world, was placed alongside actual human beings as one of the most influential figures of a generation. The entry USA Today wrote about Homer said that he epitomized the irony and irreverence at the core of American humor. That is a generous reading. Another reading, one that Nietzsche would have found more accurate, is that Homer epitomized something the culture recognized in itself so completely that it stopped being able to see the difference between a warning and a mirror. Robert Thompson, a professor at Syracuse University who studies popular culture and television, said in interviews that 3 centuries from now, English professors will be regarding Homer Simpson as one of the greatest creations in human storytelling. He may be right, but it is worth sitting with what that means. The greatest creation in human storytelling, if Thompson is correct, will be a man whose defining characteristics are that he avoids effort, consumes endlessly, changes nothing, and returns to the couch. The greatest creation, not the most cautionary, not the most instructive, the greatest. The Sunday Times in London described Homer as every age's great consoling failure, its lovable, pretension-free mediocrity. That phrase, consoling failure, deserves more attention than it usually gets. Console means to comfort. Homer's failure comforts us. His inability to grow, to change, to become something more than he is, makes the people watching him feel better about their own inability to do those things. He is not an inspiration. He is a permission slip. He exists so that the person on their own couch, with their own beer, watching their own television, can feel that this is a recognizable and acceptable way to spend a life. This is what Nietzsche was afraid of. Not the last man in isolation, the last man as a cultural ideal, the last man as the figure a civilization holds up and says, This is the one we recognize. This is the one we put on our mugs and our t-shirts and our phone cases. This is the one we name ourselves after online. This is the one we quote when we want to say something true about being alive. And the culture did exactly that. From the moment The Simpsons first aired in December 1989, the merchandise appeared immediately. Bart was the initial phenomenon. His face on skateboards and hats and everything a rebellious 10-year-old could want. But Homer overtook Bart within a few seasons and never gave the position back. Homer became the face of the show, the face of a generation's relationship to the show, and eventually something closer to the face of a particular way of being alive in the late 20th and early 21st century. The Duff beer brand that Homer drinks became so culturally embedded that real versions of the drink appeared in multiple countries, sold as merchandise without official licensing, because people wanted to hold the thing Homer held. The pink donut with sprinkles, Homer's donut, the one the show made iconic through years of repetition, became one of the most recognized food images in the world. None of this is accidental. The culture did not accidentally attach itself to Homer while intending to attach to something else. The culture looked at Homer, recognized something, and held on. The question is, what it recognized. NPR's economics program. The Indicator from Planet Money ran an investigation in 2022 into whether Homer Simpson is still America's economic everyman. Their conclusion was that he is not. A nuclear plant safety inspector earning roughly $50,000 a year, which is what the economists estimated Homer would earn, could not in 2022 afford the life Homer lives. The house, the 2 cars, the family of 5, the health coverage, the regular meals at restaurants, the endless supply of duff. The lifestyle Homer has, which in 1989 was recognizable as a normal American working-class life, had by 2022 become something closer to an impossible dream for the people who most identified with him. This is significant. The audience that watches Homer and feels consoled by him, that feels seen and represented and comforted by his failures and his contentment, is an audience for whom the actual material life Homer lives has become unattainable. They cannot afford Homer's house. They cannot afford Homer's stability. What they can still access is Homer's attitude, the shrug, the comfortable relationship to a life that does not ask too much. The life itself has floated out of reach. The posture toward the life remains available. Nietzsche wrote that the last man makes everything small. He also wrote that the last man is ineradicable, that his race spreads and survives and outlasts everything around it because the world gets quietly reorganized to suit his needs. What the NPR investigation revealed, without using Nietzsche's language, is that the world has not been reorganized to give people Homer's material comfort. It has been reorganized to give them Homer's emotional comfort, the comfort of lowered expectations, of a posture that does not reach, of an inner relationship to one's own life that treats the couch as the destination rather than the starting point. The audience does not just watch Homer. The audience participates in him. This is what makes the relationship between The Simpsons and its viewers different from most shows. When you love a character like Homer, when you find him genuinely funny and genuinely warm and genuinely recognizable, you are not just watching from the outside. You are, in some small way, endorsing the worldview. You are agreeing, at least for the duration of the episode, that this is a reasonable way to be, that the beer is enough, that the couch is fine, that the carbon rod can have the parade. The show understood this. Homer's enemy, as covered earlier in this essay, was the writer's attempt to force the audience to see Homer from the outside, to place a character in the show whose entire function was to be the audience's horror at what Homer actually is, and to watch what happened. What happened was that the audience sided with Homer. Not because they thought Homer was right, exactly, but because Frank Grimes made them uncomfortable in a way that Homer never does. Homer is warm, Frank is sharp. The audience chose warmth, the way the audience always chooses warmth, the way Nietzsche's crowd chose the last man over the demands of the Übermensch. The writer John Swartzwelder built the episode knowing this would happen. The machinery of the show, the laugh track, the structure, the years of established affection for Homer guaranteed it. Frank Grimes could be completely correct about everything and still lose, because correctness is not what the audience came for. The audience came for Homer. And Homer, by simply being Homer, wins every time. This is the audience problem. It is not that the audience is bad or wrong or consciously choosing mediocrity. It is that the relationship between a culture and its most beloved characters reveals something about what that culture has decided to value. The culture decided to value Homer, to put him on the list of the most influential people of the generation, to drink his beer and eat his donut and quote his catchphrases and feel, in all of this, not warned but comforted. Nietzsche's crowd cheered for the last man when they realized they could become him. The crowd watching The Simpsons cheered for Homer for 35 years and built an entire consumer infrastructure around his image, merchandise, theme park attractions, a feature film, cultural references so deep they appear in academic papers and presidential speeches, and the daily language of people who have never thought of themselves as philosophers. The Simpsons movie, released in 2007, is the clearest single example of this. The film's central crisis, the event that drives the entire plot, is caused directly by Homer. He dumps a silo full of pig waste into the lake that provides Springfield's water supply, ignoring every warning from Lisa, ignoring every signal that this is a catastrophically bad idea, because he is in a hurry to get home. The city of Springfield is placed under a giant glass dome by the government as a result. Every person Homer knows and loves is trapped and endangered because Homer could not slow down long enough to do the right thing. The film then follows Homer on his journey to fix what he broke, and he does, and the city is saved, and the film ends warmly. The movie made $536 million worldwide against a production budget of $75 million. The audience paid to watch Homer destroy his community through pure selfishness and then paid again in merchandise and DVD sales and streaming rights to keep the experience alive. The destruction was not the problem. Homer was the attraction. Homer breaking everything and then sort of fixing it while remaining fundamentally unchanged was exactly what the audience came for. Nietzsche was not writing about movies or box office numbers, but he was writing about exactly this mechanism. The way a culture can look at its own diminishment and respond not with alarm, but with affection, with a desire to see it again. With money, the audience problem is not that we love Homer despite what he represents. It is that we love him because of it, because he gives us permission, because in a world that asks a great deal from people and delivers less than it once promised, Homer Simpson sits on his couch and drinks his beer and is fine. And we watch him be fine. And for the duration of the episode, we are fine too. That is a powerful thing to offer people. It is also, Nietzsche would say, a deeply dangerous one. But the show knew this. The Simpsons, at its best, was never unaware of the portrait it was painting. The writers knew who Homer was. They built Homer's enemy to prove it. They wrote the reset into every episode, not just as a convenience, but as a statement. And somewhere in that awareness, in the gap between what the show understood about Homer and what the audience chose to take from him, is the final and most important question this essay has been building toward. __quote _ 10 __. Not what Homer says about us, but what the show itself was always trying to tell us about him. Section 10. What Nietzsche would actually say, and why the show knows it. There is a line in Thus Spoke Zarathustra that does not get quoted as often as it should. Nietzsche has Zarathustra describe the last man in detail, the comfort, the smallness, the endless blinking contentment, and then he has Zarathustra say this: "Alas, the time is coming when man will no longer give birth to a star. Alas, the time of the most despicable man is coming, he that is no longer able to despise himself. Not the most evil man, not the most violent or the most cruel or the most destructive, the most despicable. And the thing that makes him despicable, in Nietzsche's precise use of the word, is not what he does to other people. It is what he has lost inside himself. The ability to look at his own life and find it wanting. The internal standard against which a person measures themselves and feels the distance between what they are and what they could be. The last man has no such standard. He has replaced it, quietly and completely, with the feeling that everything is fine. He that is no longer able to despise himself. Homer Simpson cannot despise himself. This is not a flaw in his character in the way that being selfish or being dishonest is a flaw. It is something more fundamental than that. It is the absence of the mechanism that produces self-criticism in the first place. Homer does things that should produce shame. He endangers the nuclear plant regularly. He fails his children repeatedly. He makes choices that hurt the people he loves. And he experiences brief flickers of guilt that pass almost immediately, leaving no mark. The guilt does not accumulate. It does not compound into the kind of sustained self-examination that produces change. It arrives, Homer says sorry or feels bad for a moment, and then the television is on and the beer is cold and the moment is gone. The show has always known this about Homer. It has never pretended otherwise. And the clearest proof that the show knows it, that the writers understood exactly what kind of portrait they were painting, is Homer's enemy. Homer's enemy did not happen by accident. The episode exists because the writers of The Simpsons sat in a room and asked a specific and uncomfortable question. What would it actually look like if a real person had to encounter Homer Simpson? Not a cartoon character who has been adjusted to fit Homer's world, the way every other Springfield resident has been adjusted. A genuine person with a genuine belief that the world should make sense, who has genuinely earned what little he has, and who genuinely cannot process what Homer is. Josh Weinstein, who was showrunner when the episode aired, said directly in interviews that the intention was to show what would happen if a normal, somewhat humorless human being had to deal with Homer. The answer the episode gives is clinical and precise. The normal human being dies. Not metaphorically, literally. Frank Grimes is killed by his attempt to inhabit Homer's world, and Homer is asleep at his funeral, and the crowd laughs. John Swartzwelder, the writer, was asked whether he sympathized with Frank Grimes. His answer was that Grimey was asking for it the whole episode because he didn't approve of our Homer. The writers were aware, in writing that episode, that they were doing something more than making a dark comedy. They were holding up the show's central character and saying, "Here is what this person actually is when the filter of warmth and familiarity is removed. Here is what Homer looks like from the outside. Here is what the world he represents does to the people who refuse to accept it." And then the episode ended, and the reset arrived, and Homer went back to the plant. The reset is the show's most honest statement about what Homer is. Not the dramatic episodes, not the emotional moments, not the scenes where Homer briefly becomes the father or husband or citizen the situation requires. Those moments are real, and they matter, and the show earns them. But the reset is what comes after every single one of them. The reset is the show telling you, every week, that none of it accumulated, that Homer is still Homer, that the couch is still there. Nietzsche did not describe the last man as a villain because the last man is not a villain. Villains have drive. Villains want something badly enough to hurt people to get it. The last man wants nothing badly enough to do anything at all. He is not opposed to greatness. He is simply indifferent to it, the way someone is indifferent to a sport they have never played. Not hostile, just genuinely unable to understand why anyone would care. Homer is not opposed to Frank Grimes' worldview. Homer tries to befriend Frank. He invites him to dinner. He shows him the Grammy and the photos. He is hurt when Frank rejects him. Homer does not understand why Frank is angry, because Homer does not have access to the internal standard from which Frank's anger comes. Frank is angry because he believes things should be different. Homer has no such belief. Things are fine. The beer is cold. Why is this man upset? The show places these two worldviews in the same room and lets them collide. And the result is not a debate or a resolution. It is a death and a funeral, and a crowd that laughs at the wrong moment because the crowd is Homer's crowd, and Homer's crowd does not know how to mourn what Frank Grimes represented. What Frank represented, in Nietzschean terms, was the possibility that the world could still produce people who believe effort matters, who believe the gap between what you are and what you could be is real and worth closing, who cannot simply accept the arrangement of things as they are, and would rather break themselves against it than shrug and sit down. Frank Grimes broke. Homer shrugged and sat down. The crowd chose Homer. Nietzsche would have looked at this episode and recognized it immediately, not as a cartoon, as a document, as a precise record of the mechanism he spent his career trying to describe, the way a culture collectively decides what it values and then builds its institutions and entertainments and shared references around that decision, until the decision is invisible because it is everywhere, until the thing being chosen feels not like a choice, but like common sense. The Simpsons, from 1989 onward, built the culture's relationship to Homer so carefully and so warmly that by the time the show was 30 years old, Homer had become something beyond a character. He had become a category, a way of being that millions of people recognized not as something to aspire to or to avoid, but simply as something familiar, as the shape of a life they already knew. Nietzsche's warning in Thus Spoke Zarathustra was issued in 1883 to a crowd that cheered when they heard what the last man was. They did not cheer because they were bad people. They cheered because the last man sounded comfortable, because comfort, described in enough detail, is always appealing, because the alternative Nietzsche was offering, the Übermensch, the self-overcoming, the willingness to endure pain and difficulty, and the rejection of easy satisfaction in service of becoming something genuinely new, sounded hard. It sounded like work. It sounded like Frank Grimes. The crowd chose Homer then. The crowd watching The Simpsons chose Homer every week for 35 years. USA Today put him on the list of the most influential people of a generation. The Sunday Times called him the greatest comic creation of modern time. Robert Thompson of Syracuse University predicted that future scholars would regard him as one of the greatest creations in human storytelling. And the show, through all of this, never stopped telling you exactly what Homer was. It told you in the reset at the end of every episode. It told you in Homer's Enemy, which remains the highest rated episode in the show's history at 9.3 on IMDb. It told you in the opening credits every week, with Homer stuffing the radioactive material down his shirt and driving home to the couch. The show was never hiding the portrait. The portrait was always there, drawn in bright yellow, playing in prime time, inviting you to sit down and be comfortable, alongside the thing Nietzsche spent his career warning you about. That is not a criticism of the show. The Simpsons is genuinely great television, and the writers who built Homer were genuinely great at their craft. But greatness in storytelling does not require a character to be admirable. It requires a character to be true. And Homer Simpson is true in a way that very few fictional characters ever achieve. True not just to a type of person, but to a type of civilization. To the specific shape of what a modern Western society looks like when it has had enough comfort to stop reaching and not enough discomfort to start again. Nietzsche wrote that the soil of civilization was still rich enough in his time to grow tall trees, but that one day the soil would be poor and managed and safe, and no tall tree would be able to grow in it. He wrote this in 1883. The Simpsons started in 1989. Homer has been on television for 35 years. The soil question is not abstract anymore. The show knows what Homer is. Nietzsche knew what Homer would be a century before Homer existed. The question that neither of them can answer, the one that sits at the end of this whole argument like the light at the end of a long hallway, is what we do with the knowing. Homer is on the couch. The beer is cold. The television is on. What Nietzsche would actually say, if he could see the screen, is not that Homer is evil or that the people who love him are foolish. He would say something quieter and harder than either of those things. He would say, "Look at what you have built. Look at what you have chosen to love. Look at the face you have put on your mugs and your t-shirts and your lists of the most influential people of your generation. And then ask yourself, whether the soil is still rich enough to grow something taller. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.